so we're back with another alumni interview, and this time we're going back to one of my former teammates, Nolan Tully, and my family and the Tullys actually go way back too, going up, down Lake Ave from each other. Nolan's younger brother, Pat, was actually one of my real good friends growing up through high school, but, we've known the Tullys for a long time, and Nolan was one of the reasons that I was interested in running when I was younger, because he was finding success, through freshman and sophomore year. So when I joined the team, he was just moving up to being kind of like a varsity contributor at the Saratoga program, and he's going to talk about a lot of success that he had. So thanks, Nolan, for joining us. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So two things. First, thanks for doing these. These are really cool. It's been great to kind of see where everyone's at and listen to some of the ones, the people that I competed with back in high school. And secondly, that introduction was super, super congratulatory towards me. But really, when we were growing up, like, I was a classic example of someone who was a distance runner because they weren't really all that good at anything else. You were actually a pretty good athlete. And so growing up, we were always like, man, if we could get Shane to come out for the track team, he'd be really, really good. And so finally, I actually don't really remember how we convinced you to do it, as opposed to playing one of the much more fun sports. But we did, and I'm glad we did.
I appreciate that. All right, so you want to fill us in a little bit on some of your high school highlights from your running career at Saratoga?
Yeah. Well, so highlights would be, the highlight, I think Sean and Brian both touched on this, but it would have been winning the Federation cross country meet in, what was that, 2000, fall of 2000.
Yeah.
And that was something we'd worked for all year. They both talked about it, so I'm sure people have listened to those, so I won't kind of rehash it. I agree with everything that was said, particularly with respect to the fact that we totally choked the week before at Class A's. But, and the conditions were a disaster that day. But I think none of us really had a particularly good race. Maybe one or two of us did. Apologies if there's someone out there who's like, man, I really kicked the ass that day. But the next week to come back and kind of redeem ourselves was definitely the most memorable moment of high school for me.
Yeah, I mean, it was an exciting thing, and I mean, I remember going and watching both of those meets, and the feds, and this is probably necessary to repeat, just because high school guys today don't always look at feds the same way as we looked at it when we were in high school, because of the emergence of NXN and people picking and choosing, their meets at the end of the year a little bit, but that was the end all be all. I mean, when it came to your entire, season and what you were working towards. And that was kind of the goal from the, the beginning of the year. I remember for our varsity group of guys talking about it and everything. So it's
it
just,
really was.
Yeah. And it's just amazing to see, like, success, winning everything. You get to the state meet and have this, like, great disappointment, and then this really short turnaround where you have to kind of make it all right again. And that's a credit to, a season's worth of work. You know what I mean? That's a credit to, knowing that the work was done, and then just getting your mind right for competition at that level the next week.
Well, that was a credit to that team. I mean, so first of all, for us, like, back in the day, and I actually I'm curious about what the current cross country schedule looks like for high school kids, because when, like, I look back on how frequently we raced in high school, it's bananas. Like, that's insane to make 15-year-olds do that. But in any event, Feds, like, was a better competition than Class A's, and it wasn't even close. Like, we had Beaver River, Class D, they were incredible. St. Anthony's and Chaminade from the Catholic schools downstate. And those were teams that you had to beat, in addition to just, like, the John Jays, who was the team that beat us, or Fayetteville Manliness from out, Section 3 or whatever. So that was a much more impressive race to win. I think anybody looking at it objectively would agree. And so for us to kind of, we got beat. It wasn't close, really, at Class A's, if I remember correctly. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I feel like maybe that's just perception versus reality. But I feel like we got beat.
I think we were like third or fourth,
Yeah, we were definitely third.
Okay.
And to come back and win, and to have such a good race across the board, like I said, like that top five was me, Brian, Sean, Chris Dorr, and then Mike Foley. And like that
Right.
group had been together for a while.
Yeah.
Me and Brian were seniors, Chris and Sean were juniors. I think Mike was a sophomore at that point.
Mike was a sophomore then.
One. Yeah.
And then who rounded out that top 7? It would have been Brian Gilchrist and
John Clemens was in the mix there for a little bit too.
John Clemens was in the mix.
Brian Gilchrist was young though. He must have been 9th grader.
Him and Foley were the same. They were a year ahead of me.
Oh, were they? All right.
So that year, Foley, Gilchrist, and Brandon Meyer were all sophomores, and I was a freshman.
Brandon, I feel like you and Brandon Meyer were right around there too as well.
Well, I was for a while. I actually got a stress fracture that season.
Okay.
But John, that was like our training group. Was like me, John, Brandon Meyer. I want to say like Ian Hamilton too, but I can't remember if he was a year older than you or if he was in your year.
No, he's our year. He was
like that was like our group. We were sort of like the B group or whatever you want to call it. Then but yeah, that was we were pretty deep too. I think to be able to have a couple a real strong competition for the 7th man was right from the beginning of the summer.
And we didn't have a top. I mean, like Brian and I were kind of our top guys, and we were good. We were really good. But like I was 18th at Feds, and God knows where I was at States. I mean, we weren't putting up ones, that's for sure. Like it's not like when the team was, more recently when you had guys putting up ones at those meets. We didn't have that.
Right. It's and maybe that would be something interesting for us to talk about a little bit because we haven't maybe talked about that aspect of cross country yet. So could you talk about the approaching the meet from like sort of like a pack mentality kind of an understanding sort of like how valuable like each place is, especially 1 through 5 or 1 through 7, when even though you and Brian were strong front runners, not having like a real low stick, like, you alluded to, like we've had in years past, Shea Wildbaker or Aiden, those guys who are going to score in the top 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Probably be a 1 for team scoring,
Yeah. So the most valuable guy on that team was Mike. We counted on Mike to, probably more than we should have counted on a sophomore. And he rose to the challenge, most every time, certainly as much as anybody else on that team. And that was what it was all about. I mean, everyone kind of had to do their job, not to be cliche about it, but it wasn't a situation where anyone could point to, someone like Shea or Aiden and say like, okay, like, we got a little room to work with because we know we're putting up a single. So there was not really a ton of margin for error for anyone. And I think that's honestly what happened at Class A's is that we didn't have a lot of margin. And it just so happened that day we didn't have it. So, that's the thing. I think when you have a team like that, the pressure increases on everyone to really do their job every single meet, and you can't really take a meet off. Because I remember there were even some dual meets in Section 2 that we lost that year, even though we ended up going to Feds. And that's a lot of that was, we were neither Brian and I were winning races at that time. We were texting earlier, and I was remembering that at sectionals that year, we both lost to Clark Foley from Bethlehem, and he got hit by a car in that race. So if you can't beat a guy who gets hit by a car, you're just not better than him. That's the rule.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is something I talked about with Bride too, but I mean, Section 2 has always been good. I mean, it's always, in my opinion, it's the best section in the state. And if you can come out of Section 2, you've got a good shot at being one of the best teams in New York almost every year, because if you can get through Shenendehowa and, Bethlehem is always, got a good group, or if it's Shaker or if it's Burnt Hills, I mean, they're Class B, but I mean, the Suburban Council is really, really competitive. So if you can make it through that schedule, and you talked a little bit about the high school running schedule, and, if you go out and run to win, most weeks, and it's still this case today, if you go out to run to win every time you're stepping on the line, you're racing against, top teams in the state hard multiple times. We actually had a stretch this year where we raced Shannon a dual meet. I think they were 3rd in the state when we raced them. Then we came back and went to Queensbury Invitational, a couple top teams in the state there. Then we came back the next Tuesday, raced Burnt Hills, and then when it went out to another invitational, in the span of 10 days, we raced like 6 of the top 10 teams in the state.
Wow.
You don't always try to do that, but you got to weigh like your –
well, I mean, that's what the schedule is. Like, that's the difference. So a couple of big differences, and one of the things that is really nice about college is in college you're racing every other week, max.
Right. Right.
And, your coach really does get to pick the schedule.
Right.
You guys are stuck a little bit, right? Because you got suburban council, sectionals are when they are, states are when they are.
Yep.
I mean,
yep.
If you had told us in 2001 that there'd be teams skipping federation meet for load management, fundamentally, we would have thought you were insane.
Sure.
We were like,
nobody did that kind
bananas.
of stuff then.
Yeah.
And that's something we've done on and off over the years. We ran at Feds this fall, basically because of the lack of experience we had at Bowdoin Park. But it was still in the name of preparation for NXN. Do you know what I mean? Like we still were gearing towards that. So that was kind of like a team decision to run at Feds. But we've skipped in years too. At least our side of the program has. And it's like a tough call because that course is a challenging course for sure. Challenging mentally and physically, but it's also a great meet. Feds is a great meet. You want to be a part of it. So it's something you got to think about.
But you got to look out for that schedule, man. I really do think to race that many times is really difficult, not just physically, just getting up twice a week.
Yeah.
To the level you have to get up to compete in a distance race over terrain, off of a track. Like it's demanding.
Well, it's one of those things like, one of the common threads in a lot of these interviews has been how guys forge relationships through kind of like hardship or struggle that, cross country or track seems to sort of, cultivate a little bit. So maybe that's something you could talk about a little bit is sort of, how the team over the years sort of built a closeness because you and Brian and Sean and Chris, I mean, you guys competed with each other and against each other for several years before you reached that peak of being state champs.
Yeah, like I said, that group was together for a long time. I think everyone in that group had started running at the latest when they were in 8th grade. I'm pretty sure that's true. And so, that's a lot of winners running around that stupid parking lot out front of Saratoga High. And a lot of cold winners, And I think that's to your point. So like when you do that over and over again over the course of 5 or 6 years, you just end up kind of building that mental toughness, building that endurance, building that that depth of fitness that other teams didn't really have.
And you build a
credit
trust
to Saratoga's
too.
program. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, look, like that's besides the friendships that you build, which others have talked about, and which I agree with wholeheartedly. But I mean, to me, that was Saratoga's great advantage, is that you had that cohesiveness across the seasons and across training programs, and just a dedication to the sport that I think other programs didn't have.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. Any other highlights, individual highlights or anything great memories you want to hit on before we transition into talking a little bit about college?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. One thing I would point out, I suppose, since there's very few people out there probably with any knowledge of Saratoga track and field or cross country in the late 90s, I was pretty inconsequential as a runner until my senior year. So,
well, you had a pretty significant injury, right? You had that big kind of hip fracture.
Yeah. Sophomore year, I had a stress fracture, but even coming back junior year, I wasn't really any good. I mean, I was fine. But then senior year, I think part of it was just maturity, both emotional and mental, and also physical. I grew a significant amount. And so principally I was excited. Obviously I mentioned the cross country year, but then, making indoor states and then outdoor states. And then we went down, I forget if it was Sean or Brian mentioned this, but we did the 4x-mile at outdoor nationals. That was a great memory down in Raleigh.
Yeah. And you ran outdoor states your senior year. You qualified in 2 events, which is pretty cool. Right. Cause you ran the steeplechase one day and then you ran the 3,200 another day.
Yeah. I did. So that's always been something that I felt kind of bad about, because I never really wanted to be a steeplechaser. Like I just kind of did it. And so they always had, do they still do that where they have the qualifier on
it's still Thursday. Day? Yeah, it's still Thursday, Friday, and it mimics kind of like the order of events that you'd see at states.
So my recollection, which could be totally wrong, was that it used to be that the steeple qualifier was like a Tuesday night, and then on Saturday was the full meet.
It did used to be like that, but now it's a Thursday, Friday. Just like how
that's
States
better.
is a Friday, Saturday.
So that's a much better system. So I ran on Tuesday night. It was me and Justin Corelli from Shaker, and we were the two who were kind of head and shoulders above everybody else. Because like the rest of the steeple crowd at sectionals was like the freshmen that Columbia was like, hey, we want to get some experience, and like they were swimming.
Yeah. And they put
they were
these
like
guys
swimming
in
the
there.
pit. Yeah,
exactly. And they're doing 360s off the barriers and stuff.
100%. Which, by the way, I wouldn't change for the world, and I hope that still happens.
Yeah.
So then I qualified in the 3200, but like Brian was right behind me, and so I had to decide whether to do both events. But like if I did, then he wouldn't have been able to go in the 3200. So I just remember kind of being conflicted about that, and I feel badly like about having to make that decision. And I kind of wish that they didn't structure the events the way that they did. But the fact of the matter is, I didn't really care about the steeplechase because like the times are like, I don't know, no one knew what a good steeplechase time was.
Yeah, you wanted to go to States and run the 32.
That's what I've been doing my whole career. So I did both, and Brian still got to compete in the 4x8. But I remember that being a really hard decision for me, and one that like I kind of wished I didn't have to make. But I did end up performing well in the 2 mile at States. I forget what place I came in, but I ran 9:17. And then I came in, I think, second or third. I think third in the steeplechase, which again was mostly because like most of the kids that ran it couldn't run, except for that kid Brady Ferguson who like wakes up and runs a 9:10.
Yeah, that kid was amazing.
By half lap, ridiculous.
Yeah. All right, so let's transition a little bit and talk about college. So after you graduated from Saratoga, you went on to run at UPenn. So you want to talk a little bit about that experience running the Ivy League and balancing the academics and the competitiveness there?
Yeah, so I would advise anyone who's running in college to do probably a better job of prioritizing the academics. Because I was like, I treated that like I was a professional athlete for 4 years, and I think I wouldn't go back and change that. It was the best time of my life. But if it was like a decision between we had a final the next day or I could go and do an ice bath and get treatment, like I was going to go do an ice bath and get treatment. Or if it was like a decision between studying for a midterm or like going to get dinner with the team, like I was going to go get dinner with the team. And like, look, I graduated, so it's not like it's a disaster or anything. And certainly there are much more dire consequences of people not trying in college. But I do think that's something that, looking back on it, you wonder what a better balanced approach would have been, because there's just so many opportunities available to people in college, whether that's studying abroad or doing all kinds of internships or getting involved in all sorts of other campus activities, which may ultimately influence what you end up doing for a career. But for me, it was track and cross country all the time. And I got a lot out of that, but how to balance it, I don't know that I'm the right person to ask.
All right. So what about maybe some of your highlights? One of the coolest things about going to Penn is the Penn relays happen right there on your home track, which is cool. And for maybe some of the younger guys who are watching, the Penn relays is the best track meet in the United States, basically every year at the end of April. It's incredible. And, hopefully someday, we get to make that trip down with some of you younger guys. It's a trip we've made, most years over the last couple. Unfortunately, this year there's no trip to be had. But being a Penn athlete, it's a really cool part of your college experience, I'm sure.
Yeah, so that was like our Super Bowl every year, and it still is. Like for track alums, that's what everyone comes back to campus for. There are obviously reunions, and they do big things on graduation weekend for the entire university. But for us, it's Penn relays. And so when I was in school, a lot of people actually, I didn't know this before I went to Penn, but on Thursday night is college distance night. And so they have steeplechase, 3 divisions for each gender, and then they have 5K, 10K, and then for the women they have a flat 3K.
Oh, okay.
Or at least they did. I know they've been phasing that out in college a little bit, but I was always jealous. I love the flat 3K is my favorite distance. But so they had all those events, and so you'd start at like, it was only scheduled to start at 6:45, but they'd always run behind. So you'd start at like 8, and it would go till like 1 a.m. You know, you had guys out there like humping a 10K at 12:30 at night, which I always thought was funny. But you know, that was always fun because we would hang out there. I ran the 5K there twice, and I ran the steeple there. I set my steeple PR there. I ran 8:56 when I was a sophomore, and then obviously the relays. And so for a guy who was, you know, a mile was a stretch for me from a speed and strength perspective. I always felt I was a better tactician than most of the milers, but they were faster and stronger for the most part. So I didn't get an opportunity to run a ton of the relays. I anchored the DMR my senior year, but we were not in the Championship of America. My junior year, I anchored the 4x mile, and we came in 6th. And that was probably the highlight of my time at the Penn Relays. But
I think I remember watching that race. I think I was there running in high school, and I think I remember watching you run that. I know I watched you run a mile there.
There's a video of it. I actually ended up collapsing at the end because I had the flu.
Did you split like 4:12?
4:05.
4:05, even better.
Well, but so they put me on anchor because Coach Powell knew I was sick. And I had been on antibiotics for like a couple of days or whatever. I don't even know what that does for a virus, but that's what they gave me at student health. And so he like, and I was kind of getting over it, I think. But anyway, so he put me at the end in case I just like ended up having to step off or something and wouldn't really
Yeah. Everybody else at least gets a chance to run before you mess it up.
So it turns out everyone was having like the day of their life. So the leadoff leg was this guy Joe Fabiani, who had the race of his life. And then the second leg was Courtney Jaworski, who was like an all-time 800 runner at Penn. And then the third leg was one of my close friends, Steve Hayes, and he ran, you know, he's a miler, but ran one of the best races of his life. So he hands off to me in third place. And I look to my right at all these guys getting into the baton. Every single one of them was 356, 357, 358. There's this African from Iona that was like 355 and change. And I'm like, I'm just going to get murdered. Like, this is going to be an embarrassment. And so, you know, of course, like I get the baton first and they all just line up on my shoulder because that's what milers do. And so I was just trying to run as hard as I could for as long as I could. And I had the 600 meters to go. And I was like, well, let's see what happens. So I like tried to surge. And this Iona kid comes up and just looks at me and just shakes his head like this and blows me out of the water. Just completely annihilated me. And then the Villanova kid went by, and then the Georgetown kid, the Michigan kid. And so we ended up 6th, but it was definitely not like a pretty 6th.
Well, I mean, that's I get, you know, you deserve credit for, you know, playing the hand that you're dealt there and you know, trying to do something about it. You know, more often than not, you know, and I guess this would be good advice for the high school guys is, you know, in a relay, you know, especially if you're the anchor, you know, you gotta play to your strengths. You know, these if you had decided to sit on, you know, and go out and take your first 800 out in 206 or 207, it probably would have been a similar result, but it just would have been even more probably frustrating for you. You at least took your shot, which is, you know, deserves credit.
That's how I would spin it. I just didn't like, there were some teams that had good guys on the anchor that were, you know, pretty good ways back. I just didn't want to lose to them. So that was like kind of my only goal.
Right. Well, that's awesome. That's cool. So how about post-collegiate after you finished up at UPenn? You know, what have you done sort of since then, you know, with your adult life?
Yeah. So I stayed in Philly. I went to law school at Villanova. So I was there for 3 years from 05 to 08. Graduated from law school in 2008, which was not a particularly great time to graduate from law school, or kind of graduate from anything, to be honest. But
that's when I graduated from Geneseo.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. Yeah, my brother graduated from Marist. That's right. Yep. So that was interesting, but I was lucky enough to get a clerkship starting that November in the federal court in Philadelphia for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. So I did that for 2 years. I clerked for a Judge Rubino, who's the first Cuban-American judge on the federal bench. And so
that's cool.
Really, it was an interesting experience. And he's one of my great legal mentors in my legal career.
Yeah.
And then from there, I started working at a law firm called Drinker, Biddle, and Reith in Philadelphia. And I've been there ever since, although As of just 2 months ago, we merged with a big Midwestern firm called Faegre Baker Daniels, and so now we're Faegre Drinkerville and Reith, and I've been there for 2 months, I guess. So I've been a partner for a couple years, and we do all kinds of insurance, regulatory, dispute resolution issues, which has been good. And I work with a good group of people, and I can't say that I went to college like planning to be a lawyer, but I'm really glad that that's how it ended up. It's been a really fulfilling career for me, and it's been great living in Philly.
That's great. That's awesome. That's and you got a young family, right? You said a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, and it's pretty exciting. That's cool.
Yeah, it's good. That's obviously been the most significant change in life is when you have a kid, and you have two at the same time. So that's impressive. But so that changes your life more than anything else you could ever dream of, in a good way.
For sure.
So yeah, it's been fun seeing them get older.
All right. So just to wrap this up, what do you think maybe about some advice? Either, the kind I've been phrasing this is either in the situation these guys are in on the team where they're training on their own without, they're getting training plans, from me, and they're getting as much guidance as they possibly can, but it's minimal. I can't see them day to day. And they certainly, aren't really running with their teammates, which is the most fun part of their day, or maybe just sort of big picture advice also, whatever you want to go in.
Yeah, I got to say, I don't really have a whole lot in my experience, to compare what they're going through now to. I wish them the best of luck. I don't know how I would have handled this in high school or in college for that matter. I guess in college you would have been kind of confined to your house with a bunch of other guys you ran with. So you probably would end up, kind of being able to go out on runs with them, which is a little bit better than what your guys are probably experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I would just encourage them to kind of persevere through this as best they can. And for the seniors, man, that's tough. I feel badly for them, losing a whole season. But hopefully they'll be able to get off to college or whatever they're doing next and start the next chapter. Overall, piece of advice I would say is, really use the time on the team and the connections that you make and the experiences that you have to kind of form the next chapter of your life, whether that's, running college or just going to college and figuring out what you want to do and the types of people that you want to be around. I think one of the benefits for me of competing in college is I got to get to know a group of people that I don't know that I would have got to know if I just
Mm-hmm.
went to Penn. And I think the general population at Penn, I'm not sure I would have found a place that felt very comfortable for me. But the track locker room always felt very, very comfortable to me. It was a very diverse group. It was a very, kind of outspoken and driven and competitive group of people. And I think that for me was something that drove me, but everyone's got to kind of figure that out on their own. But I think that the experiences you have in high school will help you significantly, I should say, competing in track. But I guess it's Saratoga generally.
Yeah, I know. I think that's actually a great piece of advice. This is a time period in a lot of these guys' lives where they're, figuring stuff out about who they are, who they want to be. And a lot of times, especially with the relationships you form, it's people who share similar values and interests, and not necessarily by proximity, by your neighborhood or things like that, like maybe when you're a little bit younger in your life. So, it's pretty significant when you forge these relationships and figure out sort of what you value, and athletics, and particularly for us, cross country and track really can bring that out,
For sure.
because I just think about the conversations that we would have on runs through town and stuff like that, and the goofy things we would say and do, and
yeah,
it was training, but it was also hanging out with your friends, and you get to a certain level in your fitness where you can be zipping through town at 6:45 or whatever for 8 or 9 miles and everything, and but we hanging out with your friends and talking and laughing and joking. And I always enjoyed the summers, right, when everybody would come back and we would get together for runs in the summers, and people would be doing their training, and that would be cool. So those relationships that we had built over the years running at Saratoga, still kind of find their way into what you're doing later on in life, which is cool.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the other thing is, if you commit yourself to a team, into a program, into a sport, eventually, for the most part, if you hang with it and everyone knows that you're trying, you don't have to be the number one guy, far from it. But ultimately, you'll become a leader. And I think that leadership training, which you don't, to your point, you don't even know you're getting it while you get it, is by far the most valuable thing. When I hire at the law firm, I'm always curious about people who have athletics on their resume, and that's not necessarily someone that I'll, prioritize, but I always ask them about it and what they get out of it. And so often the people who I think have the most compelling answers are those who talk about the leadership training that they got out of competing in athletics. And I think one thing I'd say to your older kids, when I don't care if you're like the 10th guy, if you're a senior, those younger guys are looking up to you. And I think that you should take that as a responsibility, and you should kind of try to meet that responsibility, and be inclusive and be supportive. And no one's ready to do that when they're in high school. I certainly wasn't, and I don't think I met that challenge looking back on it. But I think if they, understand the significance of that and take that challenge on, you'll make contacts that are going to be valuable to you for life.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome piece of advice. I think that's a good parting shot to end up with. All right, so thanks so much, Nolan, for taking the time and sharing a lot of your experiences with us, and hopefully get to catch up again soon.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Shane.
All right, you got it.